Welcome back to a Sharper Life podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Sharp, a two-time best-selling author, wellness expert, and your personal transformation coach. If you're a new listener, welcome. I hope that you hit that subscribe button, as every Monday, A Sharper Life is here to cut through the noise with real talk, actionable advice, and juicy conversations. Whether it's a solo episode where I'm dropping life hacks, personal stories, or results-driven tips, to interviews with guest experts, celebrities, doctors, and people just like you with inspiring stories, A Sharper Life is guaranteed to help you feel motivated, take action, and feel less alone in your struggles. And if you are a returning subscriber, please welcome back. Today, it's going to be an amazing episode. I am joined by Ryan Dusick. He is a founding member and the original drummer of Maroon 5. And yes, that Maroon 5. He's opening up about creating the band at 16, how they skyrocketed to fame with him and Adam Levine and other members, and what life was really like behind the glitz and glamour of the Hollywood success. Ryan vulnerably shares about dealing with anxiety, addictions, burnout, and the moment that his world came crashing down when he was asked to leave Maroon 5. What followed was a period that we all face in life, questioning who you are, your purpose, and ultimately what you choose to do in those down moments. I know that you will be inspired by his story, and it will give you a new perspective on the importance of inner happiness, even if you're chasing after external success. Ryan, it is a pleasure to have you on A Sharper Life. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's my pleasure.
So I want to jump in your memoir. Adam Levine writes the foreword, and in that he says, quote, "At the time I had suspected it was something beyond the physical, a mental block of sorts. Telling Ryan he was out of the band is still one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life." And so for those listening, you were the former drummer of Maroon 5. What happened?
Well, if it were a short answer, I wouldn't have had to write a 300-page book about it, but I'll do my best to make it the short version. I started the band. I started the band in my garage when I was 16 years old, and it took us a decade to get to the level that, people know now of Maroon 5. And for most of that, it was a wonderful adventure. It was just, 4 and then 5 guys having a wonderful time being creative together and building this career over time, and a lot of hard work. Of course, nothing can really prepare you for what happens when you get to that place where now your life is, constant pressure of performance and being in the limelight. And for me, I think what happened, it was a combination of things. I did have a real physical injury that was hindering my ability to play, but it was very much wrapped up in my psychology and emotional well-being or lack thereof, and how I was relating to that physical injury and my inability to sort of work through it. I was a kid who had anxiety. It was kind of latent anxiety. It wasn't extreme at that point when I was growing up. What happened was I was somebody who put a lot of pressure on myself, kind of perfectionistic by nature. And that worked well for me for a long time. It made me a high achiever. It made me somebody who, I was kind of the type A personality in the band. I was the one kind of driving things early on. However, now when you're in that place where all that pressure is on you externally, meeting up with the internal pressure that I was putting on myself, it was kind of a toxic brew that started to really take a toll on me and really my whole constitution. I started to get really worn down and fatigued on the road. I was finding that I was having trouble just playing simple things that used to be easy. And I couldn't tell if it was my shoulder injury, or if it was something else. It felt like it was something else more to the core of me. In retrospect, I'm able to see that it was something of a mental block, as Adam described. It was kind of a coordination issue that developed in trying too hard to be too perfect. My body just kind of clenched up and just didn't allow me to have that flow that I used to have when I was playing. And so that took a toll over a matter of years, really. It took a couple years for it to come to a place where I was really beaten down and kind of broken to the point where I really couldn't play anymore. And the band, bless them, they tried to wait for me to kind of work through it. And I went to every kind of doctor you can go to and tried to find a simple answer to a complicated problem. And it just didn't seem to be working out. So at a certain point, they had to move on to the next album without me, which of course was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me in my life, and still has ever happened to me to this point. It was something I spent a decade plus of my life building to, the success we were finally having. And then all of a sudden I had to walk away from that. And I really just didn't know who I was anymore at that point.
So, I mean, interesting what you say there of the perfectionism nature. And I didn't want to interrupt, but what I was thinking is the amount of people that I speak to and clients that I work with, and myself included, I battled perfectionism for many, many, many years. And I learned that perfectionism is, as you said, like it drives us and it works until it doesn't work. And at that point, then
Right.
it starts holding you back and it's a hindrance. So what happened after you left your own band? I can only imagine, as you said, how tough it is, but what were the months, years like afterwards from that catalytic moment?
It was really tough. I had to kind of go through a whole litany of stages of grief. I think, there's the 5 stages of grief that you go through. What I lost was really my whole world and my whole identity. It wasn't just the loss of a career. It was a lot of my self-definition. It was the things that gave me self-worth and self-esteem. And so without that, I kind of plummeted into a depression. Uh, and I went through all the stages. I mean, I was bargaining. I was angry. I was angry at the band. I was angry at myself. I was angry at God or the universe, and trying to figure out how to kind of grapple with all of that without a whole lot of coping skills. So I wasn't, I wasn't a kid who took to drugs and alcohol naturally. I was a good kid. I was a responsible guy my whole life. But at that point, I think that drinking became, whereas before it had been a way to facilitate good times, it started to become a way to escape really negative feelings. Because I just didn't, the feelings were so big, I just didn't know how else to escape them. And so it became a coping mechanism at that point. And really, in a lot of ways, I think that I was avoiding and escaping the feelings in every way. I kind of created this alter ego, like one part of me was this really cocky, overconfident guy who was more extroverted and more social than I had been ever before. Kind of wanting to go out in the world and pretend that I was still a rock star and kind of prove that to myself. And then, of course, those nights would end with me alone, sobbing and in the fetal position, because underneath that I was broken, and I felt like I had no esteem, I had no worth. So I had to go through all those stages of coping and trying to work through it, and the denial and rationalization that goes along with some of those unhealthy coping styles, till I finally reached that place of acceptance and letting go of trying to control the feelings. So really, it's interesting. I didn't really figure this out until I was writing the book about it, that the stages of grief, the final stage is acceptance, and the first stage of recovery is acceptance. So the two kind of had to coincide, where I reached acceptance of the fact that I had no control over this thing in terms of the addiction, in terms of the trying to, avoid the negative feelings and not work through them. And then also just acceptance that part of my life was over, and that I could let go of it and try to find a new place of purpose in my life beyond that, where I could find some gratitude for what I had achieved and what I had done in the past, without it being an anchor around my neck in everything that I was doing moving forward.
And how long did that whole journey and process take of the different stages of grieving until you got to the acceptance?
Well, it took about a decade of my life. I wish it had been quicker. And of course, it's easy to regret and say, Wow, if I just figured it out sooner, I could have saved myself a lot of grief and literally, and years of my life where I was a little stagnant in terms of uh, investing myself in new things. Um, but we all have to learn and grow in our own time, and it's just we are exactly where we are, and that's where we need to be in that moment. I think if I hadn't been so deeply entrenched in the addiction to alcohol and that whole cycle, maybe I would have been able to get through the grief a little faster. But that was just the way I had to kind of cope with it at that time. And I learned a lot in the process. I learned so much that I carry with me now in the things that I do. I'm a therapist now. I work with a lot of people that are in recovery, people who are going through some of the things that I went through. And having been through all that myself really is a blessing now because I have personal experience with the things that my clients are suffering with. So I'm able to speak from a place of personal knowledge. And I think that's connecting. I think it helps people see that I'm not just reading from a textbook, that I understand this stuff on a human level. So, it's weird. Even the things that can be the hardest things that go through in life sometimes have a silver lining in that way.
Absolutely. And I very much resonate with everything you're talking about. I went through two eating disorders that, I mean, lasted 10 years. I had an addiction to Ambien. I would go to doctors and I had terrible skin growing up. The dermatologist put me on Accutane 3 different times, and my dermatologist had said, you're one of the unlucky ones, Nikki. You're probably going to have to be on this on and off for the rest of your life. And no one ever asked. And granted, I say this now with laughter, but no one ever asked what's going on for you internally. Like, how are you happy? Are you not? How's your family life? And it went into this decade plus long of the eating disorders and drinking and things of that nature. And much like what you're saying, I look at it now of, if I had to go back and I was given the chance to redo anything in my life, I'm like, I don't take any of it back, because it's led me to exactly where I am now. And much like you, is I took my pain and that suffering, and I became selfish in my own healing and finding out what worked in my healing. I now get to teach to other people. And I'm sure you experience this, and I want to go into what you're doing now, but it's so rewarding. And especially your book, which I've read, the fact that you're speaking up and sharing, especially in an industry where we know that there's a lot of people going to, I mean, let's say we see a few of them on TV and whatnot, but you're in an industry, or you were in an industry, that people are pretty silent about their suffering. And so I think you writing this book, if people actually pick it up, and I can say it's amazing, it's absolutely worth the read, that you are now at a place of helping others to not have to go through that 10 plus years of the grief. And so that's kind of the silver lining that at least I really, really resonate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you read the book, and I appreciate the kind words. And that's really the goal. It's like, if I can save people some of the suffering that I went through and help them work through it faster, it's really fulfilling to me to see somebody who's a young person and has their whole life ahead of them, already learning some of the things that it took me a couple decades to learn. It's to have those lessons. It's so hard to learn it early on, because the younger you are, the more defensive you can be, the harder it is to have that sort of wisdom that comes from having life sort of hand you your ass a couple times, right? So to be young, though, to have that benefit now, I think young people today, in these industries in particular, are hungry for the information and just the hope that a lot of people in this space are offering, that can be transformational, can offer you the opportunity to do so much more from such a good place. I see so many people that strive for excellence and success in their life, and that's wonderful, and they may achieve it, but a lot of times it's coming from a place of compensation, right? It's coming from a place of, I don't feel good about myself, so if I achieve these things, then maybe I will feel good about myself. And so that never ends, right? It's never you never reach that place, because it's never enough. But if you're coming from a place of already feeling peace and security and fulfillment, then you walk into those spaces and you have that success in a way that feels authentic, and you're able to actually appreciate it and integrate it into your self-definition.
Amen to that. And actually, I'll tell you a quick story, because I resonate again so much with that I've learned in my career and where I am now, that I was always chasing quote unquote fame. So I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a model. I did model. I look like a model. And I looked up to the 90s supermodels. They were plastered all over my wall. And as I started doing this, as you're saying, we don't know in those moments, especially when you're younger, that you're doing it because you don't feel good enough and you're trying to prove something to the world. And so for so many years in my life, I was chasing fame, and going to Tony Robbins. He has you do your primary question, and mine was, why am I not famous yet? Now, if that's your primary question, you're probably not going to be very fulfilled when you start having the quote unquote fame. And so it was interesting doing my own inner work and going through, it sounds like, different context, but similar journey to you, and realizing that I was trying to essentially get my parents to see me and be proud of me. And in trying to do that, I kept achieving more, going for more. And the more that I achieved, it's like my parents actually became more and more distant. So the very thing that I'm doing to get them to see me, they're going away from. And it really took me, I mean, I recently got divorced and I moved to London, and like next level of healing, and just like I thought I'd done a lot of healing at that point and inner work, and I was like, okay, it's like the onion, we have more layers. And why I share this story though is because in this, it really made me look at my life and be like, okay, I've lost everything. Like, I've lost everything. My relationships with my parents are not good because they didn't know how to handle my divorce. My relationship with myself, it got a lot better because I was very compassionate and kind to myself. But in this journey, I then got to this stage to be like, actually, I'm so proud of everything I've done. And if I had no more success tomorrow, I literally can just say like, wow, what a legacy that I've left. And go figure, that's when literally like 2 weeks ago, I was putting together a media kit for someone, and I was going through all my press articles, and it dawned on me, right? I was like, holy shit, I'm kind of famous. Where did that come from? And it was such a mind-blowing moment to be like, wait, Nikki, you've been featured on all these magazine covers and you've done TV and all of these things. And because I was always chasing quote unquote the fame to prove something, I was never able to see myself and what I was actually doing in the moment, because I was always reaching for something more. And taking a step back, I was like, wow, like you've actually achieved all the things that you really want. Now, of course, I want more, but I don't it's not coming from a place of need. It's coming from a place of, I'm already fulfilled now. And what more can we do? And so I wanted to offer that story. Maybe you resonate with some of it or any parts of it.
Yeah, well, definitely I resonate with some of it. I think that there's some differences that are interesting, reflecting on what you're saying. Um, if we're psychoanalyzing ourselves, then I'll go right ahead, because I've done a lot of this myself, and my life is an open book. I think for me, it was kind of the opposite in terms of my parents. My parents, I'm Gen X kid, but I think in a lot of ways my parents were very much like millennial parents. I don't know if they read books about parenting that led to this, or it was just their nature, but they very much wanted to build our self-esteem, just give us a lot of attention and love. Very well-meaning, very loving. If anything, I was not starved for attention or affection. They were over-involved probably to a certain degree in my life. And really, I grew up, I think, feeling that everything I did was just special, that I was just brilliantly smart. I was adorable. And I took that into the things I did. I was high achieving in school. I was a good baseball player. My dad was my coach, and we were very bonded through that. So I think that in a lot of ways that was very comfortable and very safe, that I had that family unit that really kept me insulated. But in a lot of ways, I never really built resilience because of that, because I had that to sort of buoy me. And once I got out of that little,
Mhm.
shell that our family was, I was very shy. I was very introverted. I was not comfortable in new settings. I didn't like anything that was unsafe or new or uncomfortable, right? Because everything had been really comfortable for me. And so when life started to, give me some defeat and failure and things, I was really not very well equipped for it. And it really broke me down very quickly. And I just didn't know who I was, because it was like, well, I've always been the golden child, and now I'm failing at these things. Baseball wasn't as easy for me in high school as it was in Little League. And I had coaches that were mean and yelled at me. And it was like, what is happening? Why are these people so mean? and so I think for
Why?
me, starting in the world of fame and fortune, going out in that direction for me was not so much a compensation or trying to get attention that I never got from my parents. I think it was more, it was an authentic thing for me. I loved music. I loved the musicians who inspired me. I had a deep connection with Adam and the other guys in the band, and we were really doing something that felt special from right from the start when I was 16 years old. So it really was coming from a genuine place. And I was not thinking about fame. Of course, I liked the idea of a lot of people enjoying our music. At the time, it was Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. Those were our heroes. Smashing Pumpkins, Red Hot Chili Peppers. And we thought, if we made records like
All
that,
great bands.
yeah, awesome, right? And that was kind of like the dream. It was like, have that kind of career where people love our music the way we love that music. But getting a taste of fame, getting into the limelight, and realizing it feels pretty good to have people screaming your name and yelling your lyrics back at you and getting that kind of attention, it felt familiar to me. It was that safe womb again.
Oh, interesting. Because of that's what you got from childhood. So then you were getting that, and it's right. We can go into this of the nervous system seeks what's familiar. And so that was what was familiar for you. Like, whereas I have such an opposite of, I didn't get the praise or the this. So now that, people give me attention, I'm like, wait, this is kind of weird. Like, it's almost uncomfortable at times, and I'm very introverted, but that's okay. Interesting. It continues. So you then start getting famous, and I'm curious, did that then, once the fame kicked off, and it sounds like you guys, I always laugh at this where people are like, they're the overnight success. And I'm like, they were like anyone, it's like you were the 10-year overnight success because you were building it and doing it because you loved it. So once fame kicked in and you get a taste of it, what happened then? Like, is that when alcohol dependency started, or drug use, or the perfectionism? Like, where did the kind of start of the downfall begin for you?
Well, it wasn't the typical story that you've probably read 100 times or seen in a movie of the rock star that everything went off the rails and they had a drug problem and got kicked out of the band. And for me, the addiction part became more of a problem after I left the band, or after I wasn't playing anymore. But it definitely played a factor, I think. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't something that you can point to like one day or one month or one tour even, where the wheels came off. Essentially what happened was, in 2002 we went on the road to promote the album Songs About Jane. This was already 8 years into us being a band. We started the band in 94. And this was our second record deal. And so we kind of knew the ropes at that point. We had already had a failed album. We went on the road in 97 and the album didn't take off. And we learned the hard way that all of those, fantasies and everything that everyone was promising us was not going to come easily, that you really had to work for it. So we were under no illusions that we were going to be on the road for a long time, have to work really hard and do really just say yes to everything for a while. And that was okay with us, because the first album had been more like the old world of the record industry, where basically big record label signs you to a big contract. They spend $1 million on your album and your video and stuff. They put you out there, and And if you have a hit like in the first week, then great, you're going to be a big star. But if not, you're done, and they drop you. And that sink or swim model was like, we don't want to repeat that mistake. So we went with an independent label who was telling us, we want to put you on the road. We want to do it grassroots. So that all sounded really good to us because we had more sort of control over our destiny. We could build up a fan base slowly and not depend only on radio and promotion and all that stuff. But that sounds nice on paper, but a tour itinerary on paper doesn't always line up with what the reality is for a human being having to go through every single day of that itinerary in real time. So 2002, 2003, we played over 500 shows in those 2 years alone.
Whoa. I want to ask a quick question on that. Just in terms of like the human psyche and being a band and being around people that much, no matter how much you love them, I'm sure there's going to be conflict, and I'm sure, you guys are at times living it up. What were the positives and the great moments, and what were some of the more challenging moments during that time for you?
Oh, well, I had such a good time so much of the time. And now I'm able to look back and recognize that and have such gratitude for those experiences because, at a certain point in my life, these guys were my best friends in the whole world. We shared a sense of humor that is unlike anything else I've ever experienced in my life. We could just kind of read each other's minds and play off of each other like we were a comedy troupe. And there's a delirium that comes with, 5 or 6 guys driving around in a passenger van around the country 5 times over, and just the long hours. And it's just us, there's just nobody else that can relate to that experience that you're having, akin to being, in an army band of brothers together, except there's no threat of death or anything like that. It's all just us going out in the world and conquering in the name of Maroon 5, conquering the globe. And so there was a lot of wonderful, just uplifting moments of feeling really connected to the people around me, to the purpose of what we were doing, to the aspect of our craft that was day in and day out having to work on getting better and better. Just on every level, it was all the stuff you look for to be kind of in flow and to have purpose and fulfillment in your life and joy and fun. Now that's all the good stuff, but over time, the bad stuff crept in. And I think for me, by nature, being the kid that I described earlier with my family, I was kind of a homebody by nature. And the first time we toured in '97, that became an issue for me. I was very homesick. I also was always a kind of a relationship guy. So I had a girlfriend back home that I missed a lot. I wasn't really partaking of the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. So that was all, it wasn't really that appealing to me. I wanted to have the person that I wanted to be close with, and she wasn't with me. I wanted to be close to my friends and family back home, and they weren't with me. So that was already a challenge for me. But in 2002, 3, 4, I was trying to take just a really positive attitude. Like, okay, well, I'm going to have to shift that. I'm going to have to be okay with this circus lifestyle and then just lean into it a bit. And so I think to a certain extent, there was a compensation that happened because the days, weeks, and months were long, and we were home for a couple days, and then we went out on another 2 or 3 month tour, and I was getting fatigued and homesick, but I just had to kind of pretend that I was really enjoying this and put on this brave, happy face. And then the pain started creeping up. I started having pain in my pitching shoulder, which was an injury from high school. That was the first sign, and I knew that was a legitimate thing, but it became a real deep down concern of mine. I started having these feelings of self-doubt that like, this is going to end badly for me, like almost ruminating on what sort of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like this, I'm not going to be able to hack this. At a certain point, this is going to be too much. And I would have these visions of like, we're going to be on live TV in front of millions of people, and I'm just going to fall apart. I'm not going to be able to play. And that's going to be the end. And just these really sort of fatalistic kind of thoughts and feelings about what we were doing. And then on top of that, I was a self-taught drummer. Like I had never taken lessons. I had never studied music, and I was an athlete growing up. So it came easily to me because I could just coordinate playing the drums, just watching other drummers do it. which was awesome in some ways. I think it gave me a unique style and it made me more creative.
Wow.
And I wasn't sort of burdened by the ways you're supposed to do it. However, I skipped over some important lessons in terms of how to avoid injury, how to avoid getting really fatigued, and how to do things, more efficiently. So I think that really played a factor, because now I was also playing with pain, playing with fatigue, trying to get through these shows. And there was a discernible shift when we went from being an opening act, which we were for about a year and a half, to now being a headliner on our first headlining tour in the fall of 2003, where it went from playing 30, 40-minute sets to playing 90-minute sets every night. And also on top of that, you have to remember, we're on this worldwide campaign to be global superstars. So we're doing meet and greets every day. After sound check, we're doing interviews before or after that. We're doing, we're going in the morning to radio stations and doing, acoustic performances and in-store appearances. So it was like never ending. It wasn't just the shows. And again, I'm an introvert by nature. I'm not somebody who naturally just wants to be around people and be on all the time. So that was very taxing on me. So it really was a combination of a lot of different factors. And there was one more that I mentioned briefly in the book, but I relate to some of what you talk about in terms of eating disorder and the pressure of the industry that you were in. For us, you coming out with that album in 2002, you have to put it in the context. There were two cultural things happening in the music industry at that point. There was the Strokes and the kind of heroin chic kind of image. And then there was the boy bands, NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, that was very cute and cuddly and unoffensive looking, right? And we kind of were somewhere right in the middle of those worlds. I think the people who passed us off as a boy band, even though we were a real rock band. And the people that on the other end, we weren't cool enough, to be, in some ways we had similarities to both of those worlds in terms of the image that we were creating and the music that we were playing. We were influenced by some of the same influences of both of those camps. So when we did photo shoots, when we did videos, I got a lot of feedback like, you look too healthy, because they wanted us to look more like the Strokes.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, I was an athlete growing up. I had broad shoulders. God. I was the biggest guy in the band. And they would tell me, you need to hunch over. Like, your posture is too good. And I would look at these photos and I would compare myself to the other guys in the band who were naturally very slight. And I looked like this big kind of manly guy by comparison. And so I became conscious of that. And so oftentimes when we would go on stage, when we would do a photo shoot or a video shoot, I didn't want to eat beforehand. And so a lot of times I would eat maybe 1 or 2 meals a day. And the first one sometimes we were sleeping until afternoon, and then we had sound check and I'd have my first meal around like 3:00. We'd play at 8 or 9 o'clock. And then I would eat some greasy meal at Denny's at like midnight and then go to sleep. And that was like my cycle. And so it wasn't very healthy. I don't know if I would say I would go to this extent that I had a diagnosable eating disorder, but I would say that it was disordered eating, and that my relationship with my body and food was not healthy during that time. And given the fact that I was burning a ton of calories and, just the demands that I was putting on my constitution were so great, that had to have played a factor in terms of how much I felt worn down.
Absolutely. I see many parallels. Like, as I said before, it's different contexts of the stories, but when you boil it down, and I think this is where, and we're going to get into what you're doing now, but where you and I can work with any client and their story is different, but you understand the feelings, the emotions, the underlying things that's causing the burnout or the addictions. So you then went through this journey, the grief journey, let's call it, the 10-year plus grief journey. And you then became a marriage and family therapist, and your new book, The Harder to Breathe, a memoir of making Maroon 5, losing it all, and finding recovery. What prompted you to do this book now?
It was really a special moment in my life when I sat down to write the book. And I now look at it as probably the most fulfilling thing I've done in my life to date, writing that book. Essentially, I got sober from my addiction to alcohol in 2016. And the first few years of my recovery I was really dedicated to my recovery. That was the main thing in my life. And I was very involved in the recovery community. And at a certain point, I was volunteering at a recovery center for a little over 2 years. I was running groups as a peer support and co-leader of groups. And that was, really the greatest thing I had going, not just in my recovery program, but just in my life in terms of feeling a new sense of purpose and self-esteem, feeling like I had something to offer other human beings in a helpful way. That got me thinking, I had been hanging on to this previous identity as a musician, and it had been tormenting me for a long time. And now I have this new sense of purpose that comes from something totally unrelated, that embraced talents I might have had before, or talents I might have gained in the process of everything I went through. But either way, they were new discoveries for me and things that were really lifting me up and giving me direction and purpose. So I just kind of grabbed the bull by the horns and decided to apply to a graduate program, a master's program in clinical psychology, originally to become a drug counselor. But in the process, I realized I just wanted to be a therapist and work with a broader population. So there was a kind of a journey in that part alone. But I was still in grad school, and the pandemic hit in 2020. And it just kind of hit me. I had been thinking about writing a book for a long time. I had the first sort of inklings of the idea when I was in the years just after leaving the band, just because I knew I had an interesting story and there was a lot that we had done that was probably going to be of interest and entertaining, but I just didn't know what the purpose would be, because I was still in this dark place, and it would just be this kind of woe is me story, and would probably smack of, me just being thirsty for attention still. But at this point now, fast forward, where I'm in this wonderful place of recovery, and really everything I was doing was coming from an authentic place of wanting to be of service, wanting to do things that were inspiring and uplifting to me. And it just occurred to me, like, the book has a happy ending now. And so therefore it has a purpose. It can offer hope to people that can see themselves in the things that I struggle with. And it's an opportunity for me to share and give back some of the things that I've gained the hard way in my own life, and also some of the wisdom that I was gaining as an actual education in psychology. And so it took a little bit of figuring out what the tone would be of the book, because I didn't want it to be, my first impulse being in grad school was to make it like a case study on myself, to make it very psychobabble, but I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be something that anyone can relate to just tell the story and let it speak for itself, kind of allow the reader to have the insights that I gained as I gained them throughout the story, and just have it be something that's kind of entertaining and engaging, but offers you hope and some tools along the way. So it just kind of started coming out of me in 2020, as I had a lot more free time on my hands. Our classes went online, and we were shut down in this quarantine. So I just sat at this desk, and it started pouring out of me, and it became this wonderful process. It was really like the ultimate closure that I needed. It was like a narrative therapy, working through all the stuff that I'd already been working on, but this gave me the opportunity to do it in long form, in a way that I had to pore over every line and really discern what is the takeaway here, and go back to those places and really process them in complete ways. And in some ways, things that I hadn't fully processed. And I in order to really go to a place of real vulnerability and authenticity, I had to do that in order to write this book. So it became, just in the writing of it, a really purposeful and fulfilling process. But then releasing it into the world became this other opportunity for me to become an advocate, and to get out and to start to talk about this stuff and have these kinds of conversations we're having right now. And so it just continues to offer me these blessings that I'm just beginning to see what else will come from it.
And there will be so much more magic that comes from it. That's something that I've definitely learned, of sharing my journey in eating disorders and all of this in my books, and knowing, like, I'm sure you've experienced this, when you share your story and someone comes to you and says, you sharing helped make me not feel so alone, or knowing what you went through, it gives me hope. And so I very, very much resonate with that. Now, I'm curious, just based on everything you've learned now and working with clients as a therapist, people have addictions, and whether we're calling it actual full-blown addictions or disorders or just coping mechanisms to substances, alcohol, over exercising, shopping, even addictions to negative thinking and keeping ourselves in that box. What are some warning signs based on what you know now and working with people? What are warning signs people should look out for when it comes to these behaviors actually becoming problematic?
Well, it is tough. It's hard to know when somebody has crossed over that line from something being, when I started drinking more heavily, it's like everyone around me was drinking pretty heavily. I was in my 20s and in a band, and there were a lot of parties and a lot of people partying. So when does it become something that is a problem, right? How do you discern when somebody's crossed over that line? And I think it really is when you start seeing behavior that is out of the norm for that person. When somebody who is normally, outgoing starts becoming more withdrawn, and that's out of character for them, or somebody who is naturally introverted all of a sudden starts having the kind of personality that I had, where you're just this alter ego rock star party animal. Um, Even if it looks happy on the surface, it's like, oh, look, they're having a ball. It's like that's out of character for them. So there's something going on there, right? And then just listening to what it is that they're saying exactly, because people reveal things both in their body language and in the words they choose when they become very self-deprecating. It could be sarcastic, but you're revealing something underneath the surface that's going on there. There's always a little bit of truth in the things that you choose to say, even if you're being sarcastic or making light of it, right? So there's little clues that you can pick up on. Of course, it's easy to see when somebody just looks really sick and their life is falling apart, their relationships are falling apart, they're losing their job. Like when it gets to that point, obviously it becomes pretty obvious that somebody is really struggling. But even then, it can be really difficult to try to help that person because, as we know, you can't force someone to help themselves. The person has to be ready to accept help and to want to make some changes. So the advice that I give to people that are a lot of times when I do speaking engagements, one of the main questions people ask in the Q&A section is like, how can I help somebody in my life that I see is struggling? When I see, my child or my cousin or whoever it is, my coworker who is, I can see something's not right with them. I don't know what's going on, but they seem withdrawn, they seem depressed, or they seem really anxious, or they're drinking more. How can I help that person? And I always tell those people, the first instinct is to want to fix, is to want to caretake, right? And that's a beautiful, wonderful impulse. However, the natural reaction to that, if you are struggling and if you're in a place of denial, is to get defensive, right? You're naturally going to get defensive, like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. Don't do that. No one wants to feel like somebody is wanting to fix them or take care of them, really. So that's going to be probably fruitless, even though if it's coming from a wonderful place of caring. The advice I always give is to start with just being curious with what's going on for them, asking a lot of questions, reflective listening. I think that for all of us, we all just want to be seen and understood, right? Like that's a basic human need, that connection that comes, that intimacy that comes from feeling like somebody understands us. And rather than, what's so hard about us going to people and asking for help a lot of times is like they're going to turn around and tell us what we should be doing and what we're doing wrong. And we don't want to hear that, right? And so,
which makes you feel even worse, right?
Right, exactly. And you feel judged when someone does that, even if they're doing it, in a loving way. And so I think the biggest gift you can give someone is just to reflect back to them what it is that they're telling you, to show curiosity for what their experience is. What is going on with you? Like, I don't understand. Help me understand. I want to understand. I care about you. And really the most you can do is like, well, if you do want to get help, if you are looking for some solutions, I'm happy to be a part of that with you. I'm happy to support you, and do anything that might be helpful to you. And that's about as far as you can go, because you can't twist somebody's arm. You can't force them to do something they're not ready to do for themselves. And if you try to, you're likely going to just push them deeper into that defensiveness. So it's really that just compassion, empathy, showing them that you care and that you're there and that you want to listen.
I love that answer. I really do. And I think I mean, I guess I look at my own life of my parents, I know, have always meant well, and I love my parents, and I've gone through so many stages of grief and anger and really everything that you kind of process with your career with them. And my dad would write me these emails kind of very blunt, being like, Nikki, I'm giving you advice. You might not like it, or he would call it feedback. And it was really hard hitting, you know, quote unquote, out of concern, only the way in which it was written, that it never felt like, hey, I see there's this thing and I see that you're struggling a little bit. Can I help in any way? Or is there anything that I can do? Do you just, yeah, as you said, like, can I just be a soundboard for you? And so I fully agree and think that it's one of the most underutilized things when we're trying to help someone, which is coming from a good place, is to truly sit back and shut up. Like, and I say that like with love of, we all, you said that great. Like, we all want to be seen and heard. And it's like, I have this amazing advice and I want to tell it to you because I know it will help you. And you see this all the time. Like, and I'm not slamming vegans or anything, but it's like someone will become vegan and their life changes and they feel amazing. And they go out to the world and they start kind of getting a little angry and aggressive to other people on changing. And it's like, but whoa, that's not the point here. I thought it was to help people feel better. And something that I've learned and I teach is that you can't hate yourself into change. You can only love yourself into it. And it's so easy to think about, but it's such a hard concept because we're almost hardwired to hate things about ourselves. And so I go a step further and I say, can you love yourself even if you don't like yourself? So can you love who you are and all that you've been through, even if there are things that you don't like in your life right now? So I wanted to ask about this because as I was reading your book and learning about you and all of these things that you've done and this new kind of Ryan 2.0, I'm sure you've had many iterations. The question came to me just about people having a fear to go to, let's say, AA. So, we're all scared of fear of judgment from others. We're judging ourselves all the time. So, and then there's the misery loves company. So like, I've thought about this too of AA meetings where I'm like, I wouldn't ever want to go to one of those because I don't know who's going to be there. And right, the brain likes certainty and control and all of that. And so I am sure there's many people out there that could benefit even just from the community and the support. What advice would you have for someone who's kind of on that precipice of thinking it could be a good thing? Or let's say they have an alcoholic parent and there's groups for that, but they're scared to go for whatever reason. What advice do you have for those people?
Well, I think a lot of the time, the tendency is to think, going to a meeting is essentially like a life commitment, that because you go to a meeting, that means you're now going to become, I had this, I'm going to become an AA person, and I didn't want to become an AA person. I had a stereotype in my mind of what an AA person was. I didn't want to be that. And so, that's just sort of a rationalization to not go, a justification like, well, I don't want to be that. So I'm not even going to go the first time. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is as well. I think that essentially what I tell people is going to one meeting is just going to one meeting. And it might be life-changing or it might not. Try to go in without any expectations whatsoever. It might just be a room full of people in which you don't hear anything you can relate to, and that's all that it was. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a meeting out there that can help you. It just means that experience was that experience. And I went to a lot of meetings that I could not relate to at all. You have to kind of search a little bit to find your people. Because I went to the Betty Ford Center when I started my recovery, and out there in the desert here in Rancho Mirage, California, Southern California, there was a lot of meetings around there, NA meetings and stuff that A lot of the people were speed addicts, like crystal meth addicts, and a lot of other hard drugs. And that wasn't my story. And the kind of stories that were associated with those kind of drugs, I just couldn't relate to it. It was just a very different world than where I came from. And maybe it was my defensiveness. Maybe it was me sort of like trying to find the ways in which I was different and not accept that I needed this help. But it was helpful for me to find a group that felt like these were people that were like me. These were normal Joes who had a drinking problem trying to cope with some negative feelings, and their life was kind of falling apart. And they had people who loved them, and they weren't in prison, they weren't in the gutter, but they were struggling, and they just needed support, and they just needed to overcome this affliction that they'd been dealing with. And so you kind of have to find your community. We all seek and need community and connection on every level. That's a part of the human existence, no matter what you're dealing with. And AA is no different. It's just an opportunity to connect with people in a way that's like, these are my people, and I feel seen, understood, and supported. So if you don't feel that in the room you walk into, just chalk it up to, it's not my room. This wasn't my group. These aren't my people. But it doesn't mean that group isn't out there for you. Doesn't mean that your community doesn't exist. You just might have to do a little bit of trial and error to find it, and just to be open to the process. It's like if you can find one little kernel of truth, one thing that you resonate with, somebody says something and you're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. Then that was a worthwhile trip to go to that meeting and hear that one thing. And that may be the one thing that gets you through that day, just coping with what you're dealing with, you know? And somewhere along the line between that first one and the point at which you're, going to your 100th meeting, somewhere along the line, you're bound to have that little light switch go on and have that sort of moment when it all starts to make a little bit more sense to you. And that's when the magic happens. And it doesn't always happen in the first experience. So have patience, be patient with yourself, and have self-compassion. Understand, like, everything is a process. Just because you don't get it right away doesn't mean you're not going to get it.
Beautiful answer. So last question for you, Ryan. Knowing all that you know now and what you teach and writing this book, if you could give yourself, your former self in 2002 or 2004, at any point when things were starting to get a little rocky, what advice would you give to yourself?
I think for starters, it would have been helpful for me to allow myself more of an outlet to express the feelings that I was experiencing. Being a young man in my 20s, I considered myself a sensitive guy. I was more sensitive than a lot of the macho guys that I knew my age. However, this was 20 years ago. Not that much has changed, but 20 years ago, just we weren't having these conversations, and being vulnerable was not as much of an option, especially for young men. There's just that stigma attached to not being tough, not being able to just kind of go, oh yeah, whatever, I'll get through it, I'll be tough. And so there was that element of just kind of hiding my vulnerability. And so the main thing would be, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show that you're vulnerable. And so it's okay to ask for support. The other guys in the band, I'm sure they probably were in the same place with me in terms of the comfort level with that kind of intimacy and vulnerability at that point. But I never knew what their response would have been because I didn't give them that opportunity. If I had shown up and said, listen, guys, I'm really struggling. Here's what I'm feeling. I'm pretty sure that at least one of them, if not all of them, would have been compassionate and would have wanted to listen and hear what was going on. I don't know if they would have. Yeah.
Do you think, I was just going to say on that, do you think, like, Adam Levine, right, has gone off and created this, he's mega superstar now. Do you think that any of your bandmates did struggle with the same things that you did? Or, like, in hindsight, talking to them and opening up with this book, have you found out things like that?
I do. Maybe not to the same degree and maybe not in exactly the same ways. But I do remember ways in which I could see that they were all struggling at different times. And I put some of it in the book. I tried to I was respectful. I didn't want to like overanalyze them and project things onto them that may have been my perception or my own stuff. But at the same time, and we were, intimately involved in each other's lives enough to recognize when things were going on for people. For instance, I mean, like our bass player Mickey, I know at one point he was struggling with. He was kind of a hipster kid. He really had aspirations to be, a lot cooler than a pop band. I think in his aesthetic of what he wanted to be, he was not really happy when we were kind of crossing over into this world of mainstream success. Even though I think on a certain level it's what he always wanted, it came with just a certain kind of exposure that was not comfortable for him. And so at that point, and with some of the other acts that we were touring with that were more pop oriented, he just started disappearing into his bunk on the bus a lot. And, he just wouldn't come out of the bunk like all day sometimes. And so there was clearly something going on, and we ended up talking to him about it. And we were like, are you not enjoying this? Is this not cool for you anymore? Do you not want to be in a famous band? And he came around pretty quick. He's like, no, I absolutely, this is what I want to be doing. And I love this. It's just a hard transition for me. He was going through the acceptance of like, we're not going to be Radiohead, that was just, so that was tough for him, I think, right. Just in terms of the sense of identity, because he had a strong identity, I think, as being this really hip, cool, artistic guy. I think for Adam, it was a little bit different. And I've gained appreciation because I think I took it for granted, the kind of pressure that he was under, having to be the front man in the middle of all that for all that time. I mean, talk about having to be on all the time and be able to sell it and be your most dynamic self. You go on stage, you go into the radio station, you go to the meet and greet, everyone's looking at the lead singer to not just deliver the song, but to be exciting and engaging and charming and all those things. So he had to learn on the fly how to be that, charismatic, strutting front man. And so I have a lot more appreciation for that now than I did then. I was like, oh, we're all here doing the same thing. I think for him, it was taxing, and there was the point at which it was like, there's just the pressure that comes with that. And so I think he had to learn how to kind of snap into this alter ego of his to be this swaggering, moves like Jagger frontman. And he did it. He was able to transition in that way. So I have a lot of respect for that ability to become that and to maintain it. And he's continued to sort of grow into that role. When I see him perform now, I'm like, who is this guy? Like the 14-year-old kid I knew with a face full of acne and had to keep his head down, couldn't look you in the eye. This is not the same guy as that. He's definitely grown into the role.
Yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Where can people find you?
Well, first off, I have a website, ryandusick.com. I have an Instagram page at Ryan Michael Dusick. I am starting my own podcast, as you know, and it's coming out pretty soon. I think we're going to be launching probably in mid-June. We have some amazing guests lined up. It's going to be called the Harder to Breathe podcast, so keep an eye out for that. It's coming soon. And of course, the book Harder to Breathe is out now. You can get it anywhere on Amazon or elsewhere. Let's see. I think that's about it. Yeah, I have my website, my Instagram, a couple other places, Facebook.
Amazing. Well, I will drop all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on A Sharper Life and just being open and vulnerable and sharing your story, which I know is going to help someone listening, whether it's clinging on to an identity or battling, an addiction, or even just body dysmorphia or anything that you shared here. I know that people will relate to. So thank you so much for coming on, Ryan. And until next week, thank you so much for listening. And here's to a sharper life.